Today we'll be looking at the core HQ choice from the Sisters of Battle Codex, the Canoness. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now the Canoness is an absolute pivotal HQ choice in the Adepta Sororitas. It's by far the most customizable option that they have to offer. She's very cheap points wise and can provide a ton of interesting abilities to really help out your Sororitas troops on the tabletop. In this video we'll be taking a look at her datasheet, any obvious rule synergies, buffs and options that we can give her, and how I would run them on the tabletop as part of a competitive Sisters of Battle army list. In the background, the Canonesses are the martial and spiritual commanders of the Order's militant, who have risen through the ranks of the Sororitas, and now are some of the leading lights of their order. Each order is presided over by a Canoness superior, who has various other ranks of Canonesses within a strict hierarchy below her. Some are responsible for the training and faith of the battle sisters below them. Others lead more specific roles such as the preceptory or commandery. Between them they lead their sanctuary through the dark times of the 41st millennium, answering calls for aid as they come in, then marching forth to lead their sisters on the field of battle once they have committed to a just cause. So let's take a look at how they can perform when they're on the battlefield themselves. So the Canoness is of course an HQ choice for Codex Adepta Sororitas, and is helpfully a fairly cheap one at that at 45 points. For that investment you get a decent basic profile, a movement of 6 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness of 3, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9 and a 3-up save, which is also boosted by a 4+ invul save from her Asarius. At base she's armed with a bolt pistol, chainsword and frag and crack grenades, meaning she'll typically have 5 attacks, and although they're accurate, they won't be doing absolute wonders in close combat, only being strength 3, AP nothing with 1 damage. The most important thing that a Canoness can usually bring to a Sisters of Battle army is her Lead the Righteous ability, basically a Space Marine Captain style rerolls of hit rolls of 1 for friendly order units that are within 6 inches of the Canoness. This is really quite a cheap points investment for getting those nice rerolls of 1 to hit, meaning that she can be very viable just sat along with some gunline units, even if she doesn't contribute any more to the battle. Having said that though, you can take a number of interesting upgrades. The Canoness datasheet is a bit interesting and a little frustrating in that it's not actually all that customizable. Between the various options, it would have been a lot easier if Games Workshop had just de-restricted the options, so you could pick and choose between the lot of them, but that's not what they've chosen to do here. I believe that these are just representative of the options that can be built from the Canoness kit. First up, you have the option to switch her bolt pistol and chainsword for a bolt gun and power sword and a rod of office. In this configuration she'll cost 54 points. Now the Rod of Office is actually quite useful. It increases her Lead the Righteous ability by 3 inches, so she'll basically have a 9-inch aura of those reroll 1s. That's very flexible, it means that units can be quite a long way away from her and still get that bonus, and it's really not such a bad little upgrade for 9 points. The Power Sword will of course make her a little bit more fighty in close combat against heavily armoured opponents, but it's not the biggest deal in the world, and the Bolt Gun will up her firepower by a decent amount, but really you're paying for this upgrade for that Rod of Office. A perfectly viable option, this one in my opinion. Next up you have the option to trade the Chainsword for either a Power Sword or a Blessed Blade, though if you do this you can't have the Rod of Office or Brazier of Holy Fire or Null Rod, which we'll come on to. Now the Blessed Blade is actually a decent close combat weapon, and it turns her from being an incidental close combat threat to someone who might actually achieve something, particularly against elite infantry. The Blessed Blade costs 9 points, so it'll put her on 54 points, it's strength +2, so strength 5, AP -3, and damage D3, which means that she's going to be particularly proficient at cutting through things like Space Marine intercessors, and that strength 5 is pretty handy as she'll be wounding all the vehicles on 5s at least. And with multi-damage she might be able to get a few wounds through. She's certainly not on Space Marine Smash Captain's worth of fightiness, but you wouldn't really be expecting her to be that for only 54 points, and this option does allow her to be a bit of a countercharge threat. For if some elite infantry get too close and engage your battle line, you can really punish them with a countercharge from the Canoness. If I was upgrading her close combat abilities, I'd most certainly take the Blessed Blade over the Power Sword, unless I was just getting the Power Sword so she could have the Rod of Office. Next she has the option to upgrade her pistol, instead of a bolt pistol taking a Condemner bolt gun or one of the weapons from the pistols list, essentially the Inferno pistol or plasma pistol. The Condemner bolt gun costs just 1 point, and for that it really isn't a bad option as an upgrade over a bolt pistol. The Condemner bolt gun is essentially a bolt gun with a damage characteristic of D3 against Psychers, but to be honest just for the 1 point it is worth taking over the bolt pistol just for the standard bolter profile. and to be honest I basically ignore that D3 damage against Psykers, apart from in the rare situations when it's going to come up, so all other circumstances being equal, I'd usually just upgrade that bolt pistol to a Condemner bolt gun. The plasma pistol isn't bad, it's certainly reasonable at getting a decent amount of firepower out of the Canoness, or being at close range, but even though she rerolls 1s, it's somewhat questionable whether or not you want to give yourself the very low chance of frying your own Canoness with an overcharged plasma shot, which even with reroll 1s will happen from time to time. Finally, there's the Inferno pistol, which would cost you an extra 7 points over the bolt pistol. It's really not bad in terms of damage profile, but the range of the thing really limits it, so it's only really ever going to be any good as a counter-attack sort of mechanism, unless your Canoness really is looking at leading the charge directly into enemy lines. Whole games will probably go by without you being able to even shoot the Inferno pistol, and even then sometimes it might not be the best thing to do. Sometimes you might just want to hide your Canoness and not putting them right on the front line. In general, I'd be tempted to leave it off, but as a fun build with a little bit more punch, it's not the biggest point expenditure in the world, so my favourite of the pistol options is the Condemner bolt gun. Finally, if you chose not to upgrade your Canoness's chainsword, any Canoness with a chainsword can take either a Brazier of Holy Fire or a Null Rod. The Brazier will set you back 8 points, and the Null Rod will set you back 12 points. The Brazier of Holy Fire for your 8 points gets a once per game attack where it can unleash some Holy Fire, and on a 2+, this gives the nearest unit a D3 mortal wound attack, which is pretty similar to a smite attack, and interestingly this can also be fired on Overwatch, where it also hits on a 2+. It's also extra powerful against demons, so if you target a demon with this ability, then it gets a D6 mortal wound impact rather than just D3, and furthermore, demon units suffer -1 leadership when they're within 6 inches of the unit. To be honest, the -1 leadership for demons really isn't that big a deal. If your Canoness is surrounded with demons anyway, then there's pretty much a good chance that she's about to die. I guess it potentially could be situationally useful. The D6 smite style attack though is really quite decent, and it's a significant advantage of the Brazier when you are fighting demon units. In general, for 8 points, if you do manage to activate it once per game, it will usually make its points back, unless all you can hit with it is very cheap chaff screening units. So for me it's quite a useful little counterpunch ability. It's not going to make the biggest difference to the entire game, but it certainly could punish your enemy for putting elite units right up in your face. The other option, the Null Rod, is an interesting anti-psyker tool. The Null Rod's main purpose is that it gives an 18-inch aura of -1 to cast for enemy psykers, so it sort of functions a bit like a mini Calexis assassin, and it also stacks with the Calexis' ability, so you could be potentially having a very psychic-free zone. In addition, the bearer of the Null Rod can't be targeted or affected by psychic powers, which is a nice little additional effect. There's actually some serious psychic defense that you can add to the army for just 12 points, so it's certainly not a bad option, though of course it'll only apply against the armies that use psykers. Also, don't forget that 18 inches isn't all that big of an area. It's usually going to be possible for psykers to remain just outside that to cast if they really need to be, particularly if your Canoness isn't right on the front line, where she probably isn't going to want to be. So it's going to be most useful for helping impede psychic powers, for aggressive psykers that are trying to throw themselves towards your lines. Other than all of these fancy bits of kit, she has the usual Sisters of Battle special rules, including Acts of Faith, Sacred Rites, in which particularly the Passion could be pretty useful for helping her hit harder in close combat, or Hand of the Emperor for +1 to advance and charges, and of course her Shield of Faith special rule, which is essentially just going to be for denying psychic powers for her because she already has her 4+ invul save. So overall, the Canoness is a cheap HQ choice with a decent rerolls ability and a few very interesting wargear options to make her fightier, shootier, or lead better. So let's have a quick talk about buffs and how we can get more out of her on the tabletop. Firstly, in terms of the various different orders, Canonesses are certainly viable in all of them, and a lot of them have interesting warlord traits and relics that mainly just apply to the Canonesses themselves. So let's have a quick look through them. Our Martyr Lady of course gives you the Miracle Dice bonus, their warlord trait will make the warlord a bit tougher, and their relic is a boosted Inferno pistol, which could be handy if you do want a bit of ranged punch with the Canoness. Valorous Heart gives you a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, which is great on the multi-wound Canoness for keeping her alive a little bit longer. And if you really want to, you can make that a 5+ Feel No Pain for the Canoness with the Warlord trait, but I'm not sure it's really worth the extra investment. They have a casket that has a -1 toughness aura, which could be interesting for buffing your melee with nearby other units, but might be a little bit finicky to pull off actually in a game. Bloody Rose, as always, is the best for fighty Canonesses. Having an extra AP -1 on that Blessed Blade and her pistols will be very handy, as will an extra attack in the first round of close combat. You can further super up by giving her their Warlord trait, which is advancing and charging and +1 attack, and they have an interesting chainsword option, which means that you could have a very fighty Canoness with a chainsword, and also have a Brazier of Holy Fire or Norrod on the go as well. Adding that all up, you could have a 9 attack Canoness on the charge with that Relic chainsword and their Warlord trait, probably about the fightiest Canoness you're going to get. Ebon Chalice has their Miracle Dice and Feel No Pain save against mortal wounds. Their Warlord trait is good to include on a Canoness somewhere, as it gives you some extra CP, and they also have a boosted Condemner Bolt Gun, which is Strength 5, AP -2, and D3 damage. Ardent Shroud are a little bit underwhelming for characters. The Warlord trait will give you 6 inches Heroic Intervention, and the Relic will give you a -1 to hit. And finally, Sacred Rose has an interesting Relic Brazier, which allows you to expend Miracle Dice for it to keep on firing throughout the battle. So they all have some interesting options, but unlike some armies, I think you're really going to want to choose the order that you go for based on the main battle line troops, rather than just choose it based on the Canoness herself. In terms of Warlord traits, generally the best are Indomitable Belief, which is our favourite aura of +1 to the Shield of Faith, and Beacon of Faith to gain 1 Miracle Dice per turn. Righteous Rage could be a reasonable one for a fighty Canoness, as it allows you to re-roll the wound roll, overcoming the main issue with the Canoness, which is her low strength. Inspiring Orator could be useful as well, for giving her leadership to nearby Battle Sister squads, which could help out with them not running away, allowing you to field bigger squads. In terms of the relics that are available to all orders, the Blade of Admonition is a good one for a fighty Canoness, as it upgrades your Blessed Blade to be a flat damage of 3, making her melee even more significant. The Brazier of Eternal Flame can also allow your Brazier of Holy Fire to subtract 2 from the Psychic test for any Psychic powers manifested within 18 inches of the Warlord, so you could have the benefits of a Brazier and a Norrod at the same time, except even better because it's -2 rather than -1. Not a bad choice at all against Psychic heavy armies. We have the Bolt Pistol Wrath of the Emperor. Usually Relic Bolt Pistols are not particularly overwhelming, but this one is absolutely on fire. It's an 18-inch pistol 4 weapon with strength 5, AP -2 and damage 2, which frankly is just going to make an absolute mess of anything within 18 inches of the Canoness. It'll even be on average putting about 2 wounds through on vehicles, let alone things like elite infantry, which really are its key targets. This one's actually a really solid little relic for making your Canoness into a bit of a shooting powerhouse, albeit at close range. In terms of boosting the Canoness's defense, you can get the Mantle of Ophelia or the Triptych of the Macarian Crusade, which would give you a 5+ Feel No Pain for the Triptych and a 3+ Invul for the Mantle of Ophelia. Unless you're very scared about snipers, then I probably wouldn't bother with these ones and just trust them being behind the main battle line to keep them safe. And there's also the Book of St. Lucius, which can give you a +3 inch range to the aura abilities of the model with this relic, which I think is most useful combined with the Indomitable Belief trait to give you a big 9-inch aura of +1 to the Shield of Faith. In terms of other characters on the board, she has decent synergy with a whole bunch of them. If they're an order unit, they'll be able to benefit from her reroll 1s to hit, and she can also make use of the buffs herself, whether that's a missionary extra attack, being healed by a Hospitaller, or the extra strength or protection from AP -1 that an Imagifier can offer. If we move on to stratagems, then the Canoness has access to a whole load. Open the Reliquaries and Heroine in the Making are both useful for getting extra relics and warlord traits into your army. Moment of Grace is never one to forget if you need to pass a saving throw urgently. Divine Intervention is a potentially very powerful one for when your Canoness is slain. For 2 command points and 1 to 3 miracle dice, they get back up with the number of wounds remaining, depending on the amount of miracle dice you discarded. Could potentially be very handy if they want to have one last attack in close combat, or to prevent a key character from getting sniped early on, particularly if she's a warlord, giving all of your units around her a +1 to their Shield of Faith. The other option when she dies is the Martyred Stratagem. If it happens to be your actual warlord that's slain, then you get D3 command points. Obviously not ideal, but a bit of a consolation prize if your warlord does go down. So from all of these buffs and synergies, that we can see that the Canoness is one of the core units of the Adepta Sororitas Codex, and I honestly expect that most competitive Sororitas lists will include one or more Canonesses in their army list. Obviously, to get the most out of their reroll 1s aura, they're going to be wanting to be near the biggest, most threatening units in your army. In particular, big backfield shooter units such as Exorcists will be ideal beneficiaries of the Canoness's rerolls, and also anything that's your main battle line in the midfield, things like Battle Sister squads, Celestians, which when they're near a Canoness also get 4 rerolls to hit, which make them even better receivers of the buff, to solidly hold the midfield, maybe with the support of a few other characters. If I am looking at any sort of infantry-based tactic, I'd most certainly be wanting to use the Warlord trait Indomitable Belief, as having a big aura of +1 to the Shield of Faith invul is just incredibly useful, and it means that you then have 2 good reasons to keep a lot of your squads tailing back to the Canoness, which isn't really hard to do when she has a 6-inch aura, or maybe even a 9-inch aura, with the Book of St. Lucius. Typically, if I was keeping a Canoness at the back to buff gunline units, then I wouldn't typically upgrade her for close combat or give her any other fancy kit. I'd keep her fairly cheap, maybe give her the Warlord trait that gets you an extra miracle dice per turn, and let her just farm out a miracle dice while also buffing your shooting. For a slightly more aggressive one who's standing with your midfield battle line, I certainly think it's a lot more viable to upgrade her for either close combat or give her any of the other fancy bits of kit that are more likely to be used as she moves up the board. We already said I like the Blessed Blade, Brazier of Eternal Flame and the Norrod are both fine as well. And there's also all different relics that you can use potentially, particularly such as the Relic Bolt Pistol, which is actually pretty fearsome for 1 relic slot. In deployment, I'd be wanting to measure all of the different auras to make sure that the units that need them are within the buff range of them, and then move her up, screened by units so she's safe from enemy shooting. If there are plenty of snipers on the go, it might be worth trying to hide her out of line of sight in bottom floor ruins or something. If and when enemy units start to jump in and attack your army, maybe in assault, it's certainly worth thinking about a countercharge if it's something that she can reasonably take, or at least do a lot of damage to before she dies. Certainly consider either Martyred or Divine Intervention if she does get killed by something. You can weigh up the command point and miracle dice cost depending on the exact situation. Overall, I think that the Canoness is a great and pretty flexible HQ choice. She can fill a number of battlefield roles, and she's very cheap, meaning that you can focus on getting more sisters on the board, rather than investing tons and tons of points in snazzy characters. If there are any good combos that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments below, or if your Canonesses have achieved anything particularly notable on the tabletop in recent times. The next Sisters video that we'll be looking at will hopefully be the Immolator, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. Hopefully should be out within a week or so. If you'd like to support the channel, I do have a Patreon page, which is what allows me to keep on making videos as a bit more of a full-time thing rather than just a hobby, so any support you can spare is greatly appreciated. The link is in the description below, and a big thank you to all of my current supporters for making this channel possible. Again, thanks very much for listening, I'll hope to see you guys next time.